We wish we had a theme song. We're going to be working on a theme song, but we don't have one. Hello, this is the In the Tank podcast brought to you by the Heartland Institute. I am not your normal host, Donald Kendall. I am Jim Lakely, Vice President of the Heartland Institute, and filling in for Donnie, who's taking a little time off. I'm sure you all appreciate that as much as we do here at Heartland. But we have an interesting show for you today. We're going to talk about Trump suing Facebook, Google, and Twitter. We're going to talk about some woke financial schemes that the government is cooking up that'll sure to be awesome for the country. And also the latest in climate nonsense and the so-called conservative climate caucus in Congress. And joining us for this discussion today, we have some fresh faces and some old faces. The fresh face would be Nate Myers, Development Coordinator here at the Heartland Institute. Welcome back, regular Nate Myers.
How's it going? Happy to be here.
Going great. Yeah, we had an event here at Heartland last night, a libertarian and objectivist, Ayn Rand focused event here last night. We watched a screening of the, I guess, a movie of the graphic novel version of Ayn Rand's novella Anthem. Mm-hmm. And Nate, you were here for that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, we had lots of food and a bunch of good people showing up, and we screened it, and yeah, it was a great time. I really enjoyed it, actually. I didn't know what to think going in, but I thought it was good.
How much Rand have you read in your life?
Not as much as I should.
Publicly shaming you here on the podcast. Oh my.
To be honest, yeah, I don't think I've actually read any Rand, to be honest.
Well,
I know that's very shameful of me as a libertarian, but
we'll just edit that out of the podcast. It'll be
okay.
Fun.
Yeah.
This is
I've read
live.
all of it.
There's no editing it out.
No, shame.
He's out there.
Well, Oh well. Also joining us back after a while. It's nice to have him back on the podcast. Sam Karnick, the Director of Publications and all-around man around town, and knows a lot of stuff. Sam Karnick, S.T. Karnick, that is Samuel Thomas Karnick. How are you today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Doing great. You know, this is the time when that's your time to say some things. Here, Justin will show us how it's done. Also joining us back by popular demand, because we demand he be on the podcast, the one, the only, the blue-checked Twitter guy, and our editorial director. Is that your title? I like to get your title wrong, as Donnie does, so people get to listen.
It is unless you've changed it. And I don't know about it. Am I
we'll work on that.
Justin, do we get another apology this episode?
Yeah, no. Justin Haskins.
I'm done apologizing.
Okay.
I'm done apologizing forever. Jim, I kind of resent earlier when you were talking, you doing your intro, you said that there are some older faces here. Is my face the old face? Is that how we're because honestly, between the two of us,
don't go there. Stop right there, Justin. Stop right there. No.
And that's why I'm not the editorial director anymore, right?
That's right. Yeah, there'll be a memo. Now, I embrace being the quote-unquote old man on the podcast, although, Sam, I believe you're older than I am. I'm 50, so we have to teach these young kids a little bit about the world today.
We got them beat.
Okay. Well, they'll
be sorry they tangled with us.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. For as long as your microphone holds out, that is, and then I can take them on myself. So this week in Biden lies news, it's funny. We've mentioned this on the pod before. The Washington Post retired their fact checker once Donald Trump was out of office, because, of course, with Biden in the White House, we don't need somebody, telling us whether he's telling us the truth all the time, because that's what he's always going to do. Joe Biden will always tell the truth. Jen Psaki in the White House briefing room will always tell the truth. But of course, as Sam and I know, because we've been around for a while and we've watched Joe Biden's career for decades, he is probably the most profligate liar in Congress. And that is saying something. And his lies tend to be, a lot of people try to, they embellish their resume, or in the course of a conversation, you might, misremember a fact or two, or maybe exaggerate something that you were participating in. Well, Joe Biden, the other day, the Los Angeles Dodgers were at the White House to be congratulated for winning the World Series last year. And there he is on the screen. Joe Biden does a lot of weird things. But he had talked about how there's an annual congressional baseball game Republicans versus Democrats. And he had regaled a story in front of all these professional baseball players that, back in the early 70s, I think 73, he said, he smashed a ball off the wall in right center field. It hit the 368 sign in the old ballpark, meaning RFK Stadium, which is not used for baseball anymore. And so somebody else had to try to fact check him. It wasn't the Washington Post. It was somebody on Twitter. And they looked up all the old stories. And it was never mentioned that Joe Biden hit any baseball, let alone hit one to the wall in 1973 or 74 or 75. And so, maybe that's a small thing. I don't know. But, I tend to think it's just weird. Like, why would you make up these facts about yourself? I mean, Justin, what otherwise unknown skill that you don't have would you like to put on your resume and brag about and tell everybody right here on the podcast?
I have so many real skills. I don't need to lie about it. But here's the thing. There's this great episode of Seinfeld where George is explaining to Jerry how to lie. And what he says to him is, it's not a lie if you really believe it.
That's right.
And that's the thing with Joe Biden. I think he may actually believe all of these things, either because he's basically insane or because he's just been in Washington, D.C. so long that this is how you do things. You just eventually you invent these elaborate narratives about your life because you've told them so many times. I'm not sure that these swamp creatures like Joe Biden can differentiate anymore between what actually happened to them in 1974 and what they've just been telling people has been happening to them all these years. I don't know that they know the difference anymore. And Joe Biden is the swampiest of all swamp creatures. He's been there forever. The guy has been in Washington, D.C. longer than I've been alive. The guy's been in Washington, D.C. for like a quarter of this nation's history. That is shocking and really terrifying. And so I almost don't even care because it's just so standard from Joe Biden. I would be more shocked at this point if he started just telling the truth. So the lies and that sort of thing, obviously. And of course, the real story though is, and this is the sort of the subtext of this whole conversation, is that the media is not interested in talking about the fact that this guy is an obsessive liar. They're not interested in it, but they were absolutely, they were like clinically insane over Donald Trump, over every single thing that Donald Trump ever said. But when it comes to Joe Biden, it doesn't matter anymore. Now we know the media is biased, obviously, but it goes beyond bias to the point where it's just pure propaganda. When they're not willing to talk about basic, easy to identify lies by the presidents of the United States, not just over things like the time he hit a baseball, or I heard this other story the other day where he was talking about this train conductor or somebody that he had befriended, and it turns out the train conductor was dead or something. Like all of these kinds of things. It's not just those kinds of stories. It's everything. The guy is incapable of telling the truth. And that should be something that the media cares about and pays attention to. And it just flat out isn't anymore.
Well, Justin, I mean, I think, what was it? The number of lies that they had logged into the fact checkers at the Washington Post. I think it was in the thousands, like 3,000, maybe it was 30,000. I don't know. They parsed every word that Donald Trump ever said. And, it was just so ridiculous. Frankly, even I, would throw my hands up. It's like, well, that lie, if you call it a lie, I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, look, Donald Trump was, braggadocio was basically one of his defining characteristics of his personality. And so he might brag a little bit here and exaggerate here and there. But again, it was made such a big deal of, and I frankly back then said, who cares? But, with the thing, I guess, is the double standards. And people hate so-called whataboutism. But whataboutism is important because you have to hold, especially the media, up to the standards that they have established. And if you're going to log every single thing that Donald Trump says and call it a lie, and then you ignore everything that just literally you ignore all of the falsehoods that Joe Biden has said, not just in his past, but right now. I mean, I guess it does matter. It should matter, as you said.
Well, why we don't trust the media. I mean, that's why we don't trust them.
Well, it's not only that, like, they hyper focused on Trump, and then, like, more than lob softballs at Biden. Like they swoon over his ice cream choices. my favorite video to date of reporters with Biden is when he's at the ice cream shop and they're like, "What flavor did you get?" He's like, chocolate chip. He sounds like, like a 4-year-old describing his favorite ice cream. And they're like, "Ooh, like, oh, that's a great choice."
Yeah.
I mean, the difference is beyond stark.
Sam Karnick, are we making too much of this?
No, absolutely not. I think Justin's analogy is really good, the George Costanza, but it's a little different in reality nowadays, which is that it's not a lie if the press believe it, or if the press pretend to believe it. Because I think that's really what goes on here is the press pretend to believe what Biden says because it fits their agenda, it fits their desired outcomes, and so they not only bless the message, they bless the messenger, and that's what's gone on for decades. And when you're not held accountable for the things that you say, you're not going to be very careful about what you say. So a person like Biden will say absolutely ludicrous things, like he hit a 390-foot single or whatever that was. It's just absurd. That doesn't happen. And that he had a pony or whatever. These things are easily checked, but if nobody checks them, or nobody of importance listens to those who check them, which is the reality today, then of course you're going to become very lazy about the truth.
Yeah,
and I think we can agree. We should agree that Trump, although he was always getting checked and overchecked and falsely accused of lying at times, he was kind of lazy about the facts at times too. But that was for a different reason, because he got away with it because people said, well, he's a big picture guy. Well, I think that's actually a reasonable case to be made.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really sticks in my craw about all that is that a lot of the so-called lies of Donald Trump were his opinion. He would say something that he believes. Again, it's not exactly like George Costanza. I believe this to be true, so it's not a lie. But he would state his opinion and on something, and they'd say that's not true. There's no evidence to back that up. I mean, let's not get. I'll say the word COVID. We say the word COVID in every podcast, and this gets flagged by YouTube and everybody else, and it gets downgraded. But he had opinions. Let's just go back to the source of COVID-19. He said that it indicates, logic said that this probably came from a lab. And that was one of the big lies of Donald Trump, that it was his opinion. And it's turning out that his opinion is probably going to turn out to be right. So will they correct that? No. And will they even talk to Joe Biden? That's another thing. So the spokespeople, what was her name? The last White House press secretary?
Jen Psaki?
No, for Trump.
I
want to say McEnany. Jeez, I'm sorry.
Isn't that McEnany?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's
but
right.
the point being that the press would every time Donald Trump spoke something, they would challenge the White House spokesperson to defend that or explain it or show proof. And there's almost nobody in the White House press corps that's even challenging all of the lies that Joe Biden says. And so there's no pushback. But when it does happen, it's the old, we'll circle back to that later, or we have no comment on that. And as a matter of fact, I think on this baseball tall tale that Joe Biden said, the White House just refused to comment. And they're just hoping the story goes away. And you know what? It will go away, just like all the negative stories about Biden go away, because the media they're actually a PR firm for the Democratic Party and not actual journalists.
Well, and a perfect example of that is as a libertarian, I'm not a fan of Republicans or Democrats' perspectives on policing because I think they're both dead wrong. But I thought it was absolutely insane that you had major Democratic figures, including Joe Biden, putting forward the notion that Republicans were actually the ones calling for police to be defunded in several of the new bills. And nobody even bothered to fact check them on that. Like, you even had a reporter, a White House correspondent, straight up just asked Jen Psaki, or at least pointed out and saying, police aren't mentioned one time. I'm trying to remember in the bill, it may have been the infrastructure bill, but the word police is not mentioned one time in that bill. How are you claiming this? And she had no answer. But, of course, nobody in the media even reports on this, save, a couple of more right-wing sources.
Right.
So, and I think that this is, it's important for people to understand that I think a lot of people on the right feel the same way. I think almost everyone on the right feels this way. I am totally fine with the media lambasting the president of the United States. I just want them to do it to all of them.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it. Like,
Right.
be hard on them. That's fine. I'm totally fine with that.
They should
want
be.
you to be. They should be. Absolutely. Call them out on every stupid little lie they tell, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat. I'm totally fine with that. The problem that we have is that they don't do it for everyone. They
Right.
only do it for one side. And it's gotten worse. As much of a pass as Barack Obama got and Bill Clinton, they were more scrutinized. I mean, Clinton was definitely more scrutinized than Obama, and Obama was beloved by the press without any doubt at all. But even he was more scrutinized than Biden. Biden barely can remember his own name. And the press treats him like he's a genius and that he never says anything wrong. And you've got fact checkers being laid off because he's such an honest guy that we don't even need fact checkers anymore. That's the part of all of this where you stop being media and you start being just flat out propaganda. You're a wing of the Democratic Party, essentially, and we might as well just call it like it is. That's who you are. Just admit it. And they're not even hiding behind this veneer of fake, journalistic standards and all this stuff like they used to. I mean, they've been doing this for a long time, but they used to at least pretend. They don't even pretend anymore. They don't have to. And that's the part of it that's just brutal. I'm totally fine with killing Trump on things that he said that were wrong. Just do the same thing to the other side. That's all I'm asking for.
And it's not even just that. It's the fact that, that as one of our commenters here on the live stream here on YouTube mentioned, Biden is in obvious cognitive mental decline. I mean, he is mumbling through almost every public appearance. He has to pull out a note card. He had the other day, like another ice cream trip, right? Where they asked him about what ice cream he had. This was just another day. His obsession with ice cream is unbelievable.
I feel like it's the only thing they can do, kind of like you would, like the special treats you would give to like a old folks home. It's like, all right, it's our field trip day. Get to go to the ice cream shop.
Yeah, it's ice cream.
Pop.
That's right. It's ice cream day for Pop Up. So, no, but so he's getting his ice cream, and he had apologized for being a little late going in to get his ice cream because he was on the phone for a briefing about a discussion soon to have with Vladimir Putin about supposedly more hacking of our infrastructure here in the United States. I mean, he was just on the phone call, and he couldn't get out what he was doing or what they talked about. He had to pull out of his jacket a note card and read from the note card poorly, slurring his words, not really following along. And the media treated it as if this is completely normal. Now, this is the same media that would have on their networks, psychologists from Yale or other places that had diagnosed Donald Trump as having mental illness, and he needed to be put in a straitjacket and hauled away. And we need the 25th Amendment to get rid of this guy because he's obviously insane. And the media don't even talk about what's going on with Joe Biden right now. And the only place actually you see this stuff discussed is on social media, not Trump's account, because those are gone. We're going to get to that in a second. But if not for following conservatives on social media like Twitter or Facebook, you would hardly know any of this is happening. I guarantee you that nobody who regularly watches CNN or MSNBC has really any grasp of what's really going on in the Biden administration.
It was so much worse than what you described. It was unbelievable. It was the story of him being in the ice cream shop. It was unreal. They basically just asked him for an update. They asked him for an update on the hacking thing. And the answer ended up being, he took him 10 seconds. He said, "Oh, wait a minute. I'll find, hold on." And then he goes into his jacket. He's got notes in both of his pockets. They had notes in both of his pockets. Probably this handlers put it there because they were worried he would forget which side of the jacket the notes were in. And then pulls the notes out. He reads them, and essentially what the answer was, we don't know. That was the answer. We don't know what happened.
Well,
that was the answer. You couldn't remember that from a briefing that you just did 15 minutes ago? That the answer is, I don't know. We're not sure. We're still looking into it. That was all he had to say. And he couldn't even remember that. And it took him like 10 seconds. It was like 10 awkward seconds of silence in between the question being asked and him fumbling around. And I mean, it is a train wreck. Watching him, it feels like borderline elder abuse. watching this guy be president of the United States. Like, he should not be allowed to be president. He should be retired somewhere, like eating his ice cream in his basement. He shouldn't be leading the free world with one hand on the nuclear launch codes. Like, that's not a good thing for us. And anyone who's honest, who watches this guy on a day-to-day basis or even just occasionally, has to admit that all the evidence points to severe cognitive decline. That's the 1000% objective evidence points to severe cognitive decline. There's just no doubt about it whatsoever. And that was that incident that happened just the other day was a perfect example of it. We don't have the video, but I don't think. But if you have a chance, if you're watching this right now or you're listening, go watch that video. Watch it. See for yourself. It's brutal to watch.
Yeah. Well, speaking of elder abuse, Sam Karnick, who are you worried about who is actually running this country? I mean, there should be huge exposés on what's actually going on in this White House. There is no reporting on what is actually going on in this White House. Who is making these decisions? No one's even asking it. Jen Psaki has not had to say over and over again from the White House press room, of course Joe Biden is in charge. She hasn't even been asked. And it's obvious from what's going on that I don't think Joe Biden is actually in charge. Sam, do you agree? Nope, he must have broken off there. Sam Karnick. Oh, there you go.
I'm sorry, my the sound was cutting out a little bit, but
I think we
lost him again. Bummer. Okay, well, let's just move on then. I think we've beaten that horse enough. So we can move on, but actually kind of segued into, as I mentioned before, that the only place you're actually going to see, if you wanted to actually see that clip that Justin mentioned of Joe Biden fumbling around for his notes and not being able to actually say anything with any coherence, you would see that on Twitter or YouTube or other places or Facebook, and that was the only place that Donald Trump was able to go around the media. The media mistreated him, so he communicated directly to the people through Twitter, especially. He had millions of followers. And then, of course, they kicked him off Twitter. They kicked him off Facebook. While he was still president, the sitting president of the United States, not allowed on social media platforms. And so this week on Wednesday, he announced that he's going to file a class action lawsuit against Facebook, Twitter, Google, and those companies' chief executive officers as individuals. He says, quote, "Today I'm filing as the lead class representative in a major class action lawsuit against the big tech giants Facebook, Google, and Twitter, and CEOs Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, and Sundar Pichai," Trump said at a press conference. Trump said the suits will claim that companies enact, quote, "censorship of the American people." He hailed the suits as a, quote, "beautiful development for our freedom of speech," as Trump as Trump likes to say, and that we are going to hold big tech very accountable. Now, the Heartland Institute has actually been working on a big tech censorship project with our friends at the Media Research Center and actually a coalition called the Free Speech Alliance with more than 70 organizations trying to hold big tech accountable for suppressing our speech, your speech, and basically anything that isn't leftist speech. Sam Karnick, I hope you can hear us. I'm going to give you the first crack at it. Do you think this is significant? Do you think that this lawsuit is going to have any legs? Is it going to work? Is big tech scared?
Probably not. Lawsuits. It all depends on what judge you get, and then they go up through the chain, and eventually something awful happens. I think that it's really interesting when you talk about the treatment of Trump and the treatment of Biden as we were before. It's very reminiscent of what the great Alexander Solzhenitsyn described in the height of communist Russia and the Soviet Union, which is that the lie was always going forward. There were always these lies, and people had to pretend to believe these lies. Now, what the social media are doing is simply enforcing that, just as the legacy media have been doing. And so what you end up with is this perpetual motion of lies, and the public knows that they're lies. They know that they are being lied to, and that the government and the rest of the elites, all our institutions are corrupt. but there's nothing you can do about it. And if you say anything about it, you will be punished. So we are extraordinarily far along the track of a totalitarian style system. Not fully totalitarian, that's for sure, but we're very far along that track. And Trump's lawsuit is obviously meant to bring this out. If anything, I think it is just another. It will at least serve as another lesson to people that this is what's going on, and the progress of this lawsuit will be twofold. One, I think it's easy to dismiss it as being, oh, that's just Donald Trump. He's just mad about what happened to him. But a lot of people are going to say, yes, but that could happen to me, or that has happened to me. And I think that the progress of the lawsuit, even assuming that the courts are very critical of it and don't do very kindly toward Trump and his co-plaintiffs, even if that happens, or perhaps especially if that happens, it is going to expose further the corruptness of our institutions. And I think that that could be a positive thing in itself.
Justin Haskins, the argument that the big tech giants are going to make is that they have free speech rights, and that these are their platforms and they can operate them as they wish. And that's the libertarian argument as well. And a lot of people on the right. Well, you'll get your chance in a minute, right, Nate. I'm not going to you because you don't have any social media accounts. What the hell?
You have Nate start his own podcast, right?
That's right. Start your own podcast, buddy.
Okay.
But Justin, so that's going to be the argument. And it just seems to me, and as we've argued on this podcast quite a bit, it seems that something's wrong if a huge corporation, huge companies, some of the largest companies in the world, have unlimited and unfettered free speech rights, but individuals seem to not have any. And they seem to be able to be suppressed with important political speech at a whim, and it's always going in one direction. How do you think this is going to shake out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's really no solution to this that's going to come through the court system for a few reasons. One, I don't know what the merits are of, or I don't know what the arguments are that Trump's legal team is putting forward, but I highly doubt that any of those arguments are going to work. I think this has more to do with trying to make a PR statement than it does, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I think what Sam said is exactly right. I mean, I think it's trying to call attention to this problem. I don't think it's actually going to succeed in court. I don't think the merits are probably very good, to be totally honest, anyway, for a lawsuit like this. But even if they were, the Supreme Court doesn't make those kinds of decisions. They just don't. They don't do that. They don't upend systems like that, typically. They're very conservative when it comes to these, what are considered to be sort of political footballs. They don't like getting involved in these kinds of overtly political debates. And so they avoid making decisions on those kinds of things. They shouldn't do that, but they often do. And that's been the tradition of the Supreme Court for a very long time. So the idea that this is somehow going to be resolved through the court systems, I think, is not true. What needs to happen is we need to have legal protections in place, either at the federal or state levels, or ideally both, that say that, you know, if you're going to be get all of these incredible special legal protections that these gigantic corporations and social media companies get, and the special tax breaks and all sorts of other things that they get as well, that if you're going to do that, then you can't discriminate on the basis of people's political views or their religious views or other sorts of protected speech. It's totally fine to take down pornographic material, right? It's totally fine to take down videos of people getting beheaded. Okay, we can all agree that that's not necessarily something that we should have on these platforms, and we understand that, okay? But you should not be discriminated against on the basis of your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, other ideological and moral beliefs that are firmly should be within the realm of reasonable public speech. If you're going to get all of these special legal protections, these special legal protections that they're given by the federal government is the only reason these businesses exist. Without them, they would not exist, and that's important for people to understand. Courts, prior to the existing federal law that's in place now, had determined that if you moderate content posted by third parties onto your platform, whether it's a comment section of a website or it's some kind of a social media type thing, you were held liable for defamatory, for basically illegal content that was put onto your platform if you started moderating it, because you were in effect essentially a publisher. That's what courts had determined.
Right.
And this federal law that came into place was designed to allow these kinds of organizations, these social media companies, other websites with comment sections, etc., to exist while also being allowed to moderate the really bad content out of their website. The clear intention of that law was to get rid of pornographic material. That was the main thing, I think. Child pornography, the really disgusting, horrible stuff that we don't want on these websites. That was the point. And for a long time, everybody operated that way and understood that was the way it worked. And now all of a sudden, what these big social media companies have done after they've made billions and billions and billions of dollars with these special legal protections given to them by taxpayer-funded federal government agents and representatives, is they've taken that power and that money and they've said, you know what? We also have the ability to just silence anyone we want for any reason that we want, in effect. And that is totally and completely absurd and ridiculous and egregious, and it should not be tolerated, especially given the fact that now they have all of this power. They control vast percentages of these markets. The vast majority of news content now comes to you through either Google or Facebook. That's where people are getting it. And so these people have huge amounts of power, and they only exist because of the government and the rules and special protections that have been put in place by government. So this is not an issue of, free market economics versus not free market economics, and people who want to use government versus people who don't want to use government. The best libertarian argument that you could possibly make, the purest, I should say, libertarian argument that you could make in this case is that they don't get any special legal protections, and that that they should have to monitor their content, and that they could be sued if they don't do a very good job. I mean, that would be the libertarian argument. And so, again, this is not, contrary to what people at some other think tanks like to say, this is not an issue of free market economics versus people who like to use big government. This is an issue of these big, gigantic organizations that are part of the ruling class that have essentially become part of America and the world, the Western world, especially oligarchy, using their power to silence the people who they don't like or who their allies don't like. And that just so happens to be right now, us, the people on the right who believe in individual liberty. And that's what this is all about. It's not about anything other than that. And the idea that these people would argue, the same people who want massive handouts, the same people who are running commercials on TV like Facebook is right now, begging the government to pass new laws, the idea that these people are the free market champions is totally and completely absurd. This is all about power and control. Yeah. And anything that we can do to break that up is critical to the survival of the free world.
Well, and I think you hit on
what you're describing doesn't sound like free markets. It sounds like totalitarianism with a small oligarchy. Remember that the Soviet Union was run by an oligarchy called the nomenklatura. It wasn't just one person, but it was one party. We do have one party rule in this country, and it's really a rather dismal situation. The other question I would raise is, if this is a First Amendment issue, why does Section 230 exist at all? If the First Amendment means that they can do whatever they want, why is Section 230 in the Communications Decency Act? There's an obvious reason it is. It's there to protect fair-minded people who try to keep obscene materials out of their websites. Yeah, and that's all it's for. It's not for anything else. So if you extend that beyond the law, it's not a matter of the First Amendment. It's a matter of the law itself.
Right. Well, I mean, as Justin mentioned, the question, and one of our commenters here on YouTube had mentioned, are they a publisher or are they a platform? Well, the law says they're a platform, but they're acting like a publisher. And the two words missing in Justin's fantastic rant there were two words. They were granted these exceptions in the law. They were allowed to somewhat moderate because there was the idea you can't halfway moderate. If you moderate your comments, then you're responsible for everything. And they're like, no, we can't possibly be responsible for everything. But if we see something truly objectionable, and illegal, we want to be able to remove it. So please help us. Give us a special protection in the law so that we're not held liable if we act in good faith. And that is the two big words in this that have been abused. And the timing of no longer acting in good faith, 2016. The big tech companies and the media in this country, which are all now wrapped up together, will never forgive themselves for allowing Donald Trump to be president. They really believe that if they had not pumped him up, if they were more tougher on him, that they could have stopped Donald Trump from being elected president. I don't think that's actually possible. I think once he got rolling, there was nothing getting in his way, and he became president of the United States. But they stopped acting in good faith when Donald Trump got elected. And we're still in this position today.
And I think you hit on something important there, because I think they really got something stuck in their craw after 2016, because Trump was brilliant in his campaign strategy. Not only did he use the media's volatile nature to anything even remotely controversial against them, but he also really capitalized on social media. You could argue that much of his campaign, the successful aspects of his campaign were fleshed out on social media and through social media. So I think from their perspective, they almost felt responsible for him becoming elected, because they, quote unquote, allowed him to use their platforms to advertise for his campaign.
Yes, absolutely. And so, like I said, they won't forgive themselves, and we're the ones punished for it. As well as Donald Trump, and good luck on his suit. I think that a lot of these things need to be set out in the open. And if it actually does ever make it to the Supreme Court, and I agree that seems unlikely, and that the Supreme Court does have a troubling history of punting every major case before them because they don't want to actually come down and make policy. That's what you get when you get a conservative court. You get conservative justices, but they tend not to want to actually do anything that would actually affect policy in a big way, and defend the Constitution. But it was Justice Clarence Thomas who started floating the idea in one of his recent opinions that maybe big tech, the social media giants, need to be considered common carriers, which would put them under regulation and would basically protect free speech, because just like the phone company cannot listen in on your phone call and decide that I don't like what you're talking about, I think it's dangerous to the republic, and I'm going to cut off the phone. Big tech should not be able to cut off your social media account as you were publicly communicating either.
Make no mistake. Go ahead, Sam. No, go ahead.
Well, that's exactly what Section 230 is all about, to distinguish between a publisher and a common carrier. And if you want to be a common carrier, then act like a common carrier. And they're not doing that. I would say that the problem with the Supreme Court for decades and decades has been activism, excessive activism. And you're absolutely right that when people who think of themselves as conservatives, especially John Roberts, get on the court, they are able then to make changes, but they won't do it because they are conservative. They are not activist for liberty. Let's explore this a little bit. Activism on behalf of liberty is no vice. Conservatism against liberty is no virtue, to paraphrase Barry Goldwater.
That's right.
I just have to say, in regards to Trump's, what I would call just a PR stunt with this lawsuit, it really almost kind of annoys me, because he had 4 years to act on big tech censorship. He had 4 years to issue an executive order or call on Congress to pass a certain law, and he just didn't. And we saw this with January 6th. He threw his supporters under the bus when that happened, and I feel like he threw his supporters under the bus in regards to big tech censorship. I think this just honestly proves yet again that he doesn't care about his base. He never has, and yeah, I just feel like this is just a PR stunt for him to remain in the news and in the public's consciousness, so he can try to run again in 2024.
It's a good
not
point.
Impressed.
That's a good point, Nate. But if we consider the big picture and not just the personal side of it, which I agree with you that Trump oftentimes simply faded away when things needed to be done. But he did have to be fair to him, he did have a whole lot of people working against him practically everywhere. That said, he should have done more could have done more. And really, if he had been on top of his game, he would have done more. That said, a PR stunt, maybe that's all we can do at this point is a PR stunt. And as I said earlier, I think it's an important PR stunt because if it brings to light to even more people how dire this situation is. No, really, when you think about it, in the period from January 6th to January 20th, there should have been a lot of concern in this country about people being removed from public life. That's really awful. And we just said, well, it's Trump, so who cares?
Right.
Well, we should care. We should care.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna move on, and I'll just say that there was a lot of things Trump did. He had an unusual style, and he did things policy wise that people thought were crazy. It didn't make any sense, and actually, policy wise, a lot of things worked out pretty well. So sometimes Trump is crazy like a fox. We'll just have to see on this one. But I want to come to the topic here of woke finance policy from the federal government. This is right in the wheelhouse of our Stopping Socialism Center's director. I just gave you a new title, Justin Haskins. And that is, he sent me this story of USA Today from this week. Congress considers credit reporting overhaul, including putting government in charge of your credit scores. 3 reporting bureaus establish consumer credit scores. Some people usually know who those are, Equifax and those other ones, but that could change. Amid all of this week's news, one potentially game-changing piece of legislation seemed to slip under the radar: the idea of dramatically overhauling the U.S. credit reporting industry. Good credit is a gateway to wealth, said House Committee on Financial Services Chair Maxine Waters. We are in the best of hands. Quote, yet for far too long, our credit reporting system has kept people of color and low-income persons from access to capital to start a small business, access to mortgage loans to become homeowners, and access to credit to meet financial emergencies. So Waters added that the House passed 2 bills out of committee before the pandemic, the Comprehensive Credit Act and the Protecting Your Credit Score Act of 2021, which, quote, provide long overdue reforms to our credit reporting system. And now both bills are back under consideration. Justin Haskins, we talk a lot on this podcast about so-called ESG scores, and that your social worth, as far as the government is concerned, is basically going to rule your financial life. Walk us through what is on the precipice of happening, because if something like this hit Joe Biden's desk, he would sign it, or somebody behind his desk would sign it, but we could be in big trouble.
Yeah, what people need to understand, and I think that this is, it's tough because a lot of this stuff is in the weeds, and it's not necessarily the sexiest topic in a lot of ways, but what is going on right now with the financial industry is maybe the most important thing that has happened in the past several decades. Essentially, what's going on is all of the sort of wokeness that we're seeing with giant corporations, with big tech companies, with all this sort of disgusting merger that's going on between government and big corporations. All of this is tied in with the financial industry pushing these same kinds of policies. And there's people at the central bank, at the Federal Reserve doing this. All throughout Europe, this is a very common practice now where central banks are throwing their weight around in order to try to advance left-wing causes. This is an intricate, deep part of the Great Reset movement that's been going on now for at least the past year under that banner. But in the United States, this is now happening with banks and financial institutions where they're openly talking about using their power to ensure that left-wing goals, they don't call them left-wing goals, but that's what they are advanced by, for example, not doing business with any other business that refuses to, say, fight climate change in the way that they deem is necessary, or fight racial inequalities or inequities or whatever the issue is. They are openly talking now, making pledges in some cases to, over a period of time, phase out their business practices or their business relationships with companies that will not go along with this sort of thing.
What are those called, Justin? They're environmental, social,
So
something.
Environmental, social, and governance scores, ESG scores, and this is become the vast majority of large businesses in the United States already have ESG scores that have been assigned to them by third parties. That they actually have internal ESG people at their companies that are actively collecting information and data so that they can report it to these other various agencies that will then. Organizations and companies that will then provide them with an ESG score. In some cases, they have their own way of establishing ESG scores. And this is all a way to essentially determine how good or bad a company is, not based on traditional economic metrics alone, but based on how woke you are, essentially.
Yeah.
And this story that Jim just talked about is part of all of that movement. Where in this case, it's not necessarily private financial institutions doing it. This is the government that would theoretically be taking on the responsibility of providing you with a credit score. And they'll say it's because, there's all these problems with these credit companies. And look at all these people who have had all these issues with credit companies and how they've had situations where a credit company held something against them when really they shouldn't have had that thing in the credit report or whatever. And they hold up all these examples of it. And I'm not here to defend every single thing that credit companies have done or will do or have ever done in the past or whatever. But what people need to understand is that the reason the government wants to take this over, or at least parts of the Democratic Party wants to take this over and make credit reporting something that would belong exclusively to the federal government, is because it then would give them a power to effectively do very similar to what the ESG system is, determine who the good people are or the worthy people are of credit in society and the unworthy people are, not based on things that are actually relevant to your financial situation, but based on various social goals. And the reason I know this is not just because it's obvious that this is what's going on and because it's far left-wing people who are promoting this idea, but they're actually openly alluding to it in many of the conversations they're having and the hearings that they're having. In the same story that Jim mentioned earlier from USA Today, there's this person who works at this organization called the National Consumer Law Center. They're advocating for this credit reporting system being moved into the federal government. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a federal agency, would be in charge of this. This is what they said. They said, while public agencies are not perfect, talking about making this credit reporting thing a public agency, at least they would not have profit making as their top priority. Profit making, that's awful. They would be responsive to public pressure and government oversight. Yeah, that's what worries me.
The public pressure is the big deal. It's not, exactly right.
That's exactly right. This sentence, the next sentence here is key. They could also be charged with developing credit scoring models to reduce the yawning racial and economic inequality in this country. There it is. There's that's the giveaway. Why do we want this? So that we can now social engineer all of society to make it better using credit scores. That is the very thing that every conservative is terrified of, and they're openly admitting that that's one of the great benefits of doing this. And this person isn't making this off-the-cuff remark at some conference somewhere. This is at a committee hearing in Congress where they're openly trying to convince other members of Congress to vote in favor of this legislation that would do this very thing. They're saying, hey, members of Congress, look at all of the great things you'd be able to do if the federal government had control over credit scores. That's the whole point. This is not about trying to fix a system that is not ideal or whatever. This is about shifting power into the hands of the federal government so that they have the ability to engineer society using the financial system. This is part of this whole ESG movement. It's all the same sorts of people who are calling for this kind of thing. And it is very reminiscent of what they're doing in China. China has a social credit system where they assign people, they're rolling this out now, where they assign people scores that make them worthy of job opportunities and make them worthy of getting loans and things like that based on how good of a citizen you are. And you get points deducted off of you if you're not a good citizen, if you're breaking the law, if you're drunk too much, etc., on and on and on. You lose points on your system. Well, this is exactly the same thing. This is the same idea. There's really no difference here at all.
Go ahead.
there's an important element here of environmentalism, because one of these central premises of that is to crowd people into cities so that they will not burn as much fuel and so on and so forth. So what you do is, and this is actually a way of accomplishing something that President Obama tried to do and couldn't, which was to basically to take over all the urban development and suburban development decisions that would be made across the country. The Waters of the United States rule was more for rural areas, but it would have stopped expansion of metropolitan areas. And this way, what you can do is you say, well, it's socially positive to live in a city, so you're going to get a good rate on your mortgage. It's socially bad to live in the suburbs, so you're not going to get a mortgage at all. And so this is a way of actually micromanaging that whole process in a way that would presumably build a constituency for progressive ideas, regardless of what party they belong to. Progressivism grew up as this nation urbanized. Mm-hmm. And progressivism began to decline a bit as we suburbanized. And now it has arisen again through, I think, through the educational system. So it's like an amoeba. It's always grabbing some part of our culture and society. But the bottom line is that what is clearly intended here is a massive reconstruction physically of the country, culturally, socially, everything. And it will be all done by the government. And of course, the great thing about that is that, well, nobody in government has any desire other than that the best things happen, and that they do all good things. And of course, Friedrich Hayek, the economist, made the point that government can't figure out what is right because there's just too much information. But it's more than that. And the economists in the 1960s and onward have recognized that government in itself, the people that make it up, because government isn't just a thing, it is made up of human beings. And the people that make it up then have incentives of their own. And this is called public choice theory. In my view, it's not a theory, it's a proven fact that the people who make up government end up operating on the incentives to that are in their interest. And so this is a big move toward, again, a sort of a totalitarian society.
Well, I mean, it seems like the intent is pretty clear to institute some sort of central planning model, especially for the housing market and to provide greater equity.
I think it's to substitute the real world for the imagined world of the progressive left. You know, credit is you're extended credit because the companies have faith that you will have the means to pay it back. You need credit. You can't buy a house with cash. You can't buy, in most cases, you can't buy a car with cash. You need credit extended to yourself. If you're a business, you need credit to stock your shelves, to get inventory, to hopefully not payroll. You do that through revenues. But credit is essential for a successfully operating market system. And the left, with everything, they substitute the real world ramifications, the real world effects of policy with what they want it to be. So instead of actually being judged based on your ability to pay back a loan, you are judged on how well you adhere to leftist dogma. And if two things, I mean, just think about it this way: all other things being equal, if somebody on the right was trying to get a loan, extended credit for their business, let's say their business was making American flags, and then another person's business was making Black Lives Matter flags. So with all things being equal, all other factors equal, under this system, the person making the Black Lives Matter flags would get more credit or have credit extended, and not the guy making the American flags, because that's where these decisions are made. And you know, Sam and I are old enough to know that when decisions are decoupled from the real world has a tendency to get pretty angry and bite back hard. And another example of this is the so-called, you know, the the subprime housing mortgage crisis that caused one of the greatest economic calamities in history, and it basically ruined the world before Nate could even start making money. Because that's another pillar in this sort of thing, is that the Biden administration says here from historian Politico, Supreme Court decision gave Biden the ability to remove the Trump era leader of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, and he wasted no time. Progressives are concerned that Biden will be too timid, it says here, in changing course at the powerful agency that oversees Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the two companies that stand behind half of the $11 trillion U.S. mortgage market. And what Biden is getting pressure on is to basically do a redo of 2008. And they say that we need to have that mortgages need to be equity needs to be a factor in this. That, again, just like Justin said before, fixing social wrongs has to be part of allowing people to borrow to purchase homes. I thought we learned about this 13 years ago, that this will cause calamity. And here's two very, very dangerous ideas in which progressive wish lists, progressive wish casting is being substituted for reality. And it's going to have the same disastrous result. And we're on the precipice of it happening.
Well, you would think that like true progressives would be against this, like to cut out all of like the woke narrative language, because they sprinkle that in and everything now. But like true progressives were mad at the 2008 housing crisis, because what did you have? You had big bankers and big CEOs getting bailed out by the federal government. So I don't see why like any like true like classically progressive person would be supporting this. You're going to get the same result. You're going to have poor middle class people getting the short end of the stick, and then when it inevitably crashes, which it will, you'll have the big CEOs and the banker types and all the fat cats getting bailed out. I just don't understand why any true progressive would even support something remotely like this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, here
perhaps
again,
go ahead. Perhaps because what we have now are not true progressives. What we have are elitists who are more attuned to the idea of having a group of people that sort of sits on top of all of our institutions and decides everything that happens. So, and again, that is very much like the model of the Soviet Union, where you had the nomenclatura. So you had every institution, including the church, was run by the Communist Party. I think that's really where we're at. And so this makes sense on its own terms.
Every society, regardless of how much of a true believer they start off, all of these societies eventually evolve into this sort of a system where it becomes all about the ruling class protecting the ruling class's interests. And they, of course, believe in many cases that their interests, by being in power, everyone else, of course, will be better off as well. They have massive savior complexes. There's no doubt about that. But they are concerned above all else about maintaining and expanding their own power. That is the primary goal. And that's why you have societies that begin as Marxist revolutionaries in the streets holding up copies of communist manifestos, screaming about the importance of Marxist principles and this wildly idealistic goal of a utopian communism, and then they evolve into this highly bureaucratic authoritarian state. Why does that happen? Because it's all about the ruling class protecting the ruling class. And they realize at some point in time that they have to do whatever they need to do in order to continue maintaining their power or even expanding it. And that's what's been going on with these financial institutions. It's what's been going on with academia. It's what's been going on with media companies. All of these people, they see the people marching in the streets, the Occupy Wall Street type people, the Democratic Socialists of America. They understand that if they don't go along with what those people want, they're going to be eaten by those people. That's what they believe. That's what they truly believe. So what they've realized is the best thing we can do to maintain our power, maintain our wealth, maintain our prestige is we'll throw those people some bones. And we'll do it not by getting rid of our gigantic power structures, but by using our gigantic power structures to throw those people some bones. And that's what this is really designed to do. It's designed to, and we'll all get rich in the process. So it's a win-win from their perspective. And that's what's been going on. That's why we're seeing there's all this obsessive talk about the wealth gap in America and why it's getting so, you know why the wealth gap is getting so big in America? It's because we're printing trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and the super wealthy are the ones benefiting the most from that. There is a direct correlation between the wealth gap growing and the amount of new money that's being printed by the Fed. And who is the Fed? The Fed is mostly big, gigantic banks. We don't know for sure because no one will tell us, but it's big, gigantic banks. That's who the Fed is. So this whole system is a giant Ponzi scheme. And the left, in order to make sure the Ponzi scheme doesn't fall apart, is basically buying off the Marxist revolutionaries to keep them at bay. That's, I think, absolutely what's going on.
Right? What you always get in the name of Marxism is Leninism, and that's what we have to do.
Well, and I think you make a good point, Justin. I always find it fascinating that there was a pretty direct correlation time-wise between when you had Occupy Wall Street. And, you know, I didn't agree with everything, but I think they had some good points about how there was a lot of corruption and corporatism going on in the upper echelons of America's elite. And then right after Occupy Wall Street, you started getting all these really woke narratives going on. So I almost feel like the birth of woke culture in America was almost a corporate plot to draw attention away from the progressive minds, get them hyper focused on race and sexism and everything else, rather than what they were focused on in Occupy Wall Street, and rightly so, was the massive corruption going on between the banks and the large corporations in America.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a giant corporation or a bank or something, and you're to maintain your power and to make lots of money, all you have to do is pay homage to these various woke campaigns and put commercials on TV with, you know, the right number of black people and whatever. If that's all you have to do to be on the side of the Occupy Wall, why the heck wouldn't you do that?
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win.
Yeah. And that's how you get Raytheon advertising that they have transsexual employees now. It is permeated
every aspect of our society to the point where in all of corporate culture, and it's a deliberate choice designed to make sure that they maintain their position as being part of the ruling class. And that is no doubt about it. That is what's going on. And they will do anything to make sure that it happens. So there is a difference in my mind between the regular Bernie Sanders person walking down the street, you know, who loves Bernie Sanders and AOC, and the Joe Bidens of the world and the people at central banks and things like that. They are all promoting leftism, but they're doing it for very, very different reasons. And the Joe Biden elitists, John Kerry, Great Reset types are not doing it so that they can usher in a Marxist revolution. They're doing it so that they can stop the Marxist revolution from happening in order to maintain their own station in society. And as soon as you start looking at the world through that lens and recognizing that's what's going on, all of the absolutely insane things that you see going on make a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm. That is a great...
Quickly, the one consistent thing, as all these things, as policies continually change, the one consistent thing is the consolidation of power. And that's what they're really all about.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to leave it. We could go on for another hour just on this topic, I believe, but we have run out of time. I want to thank you for listening to this, the Heartland Institute's In the Tank podcast. If you would like to reach out to the show, you can email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Sam Karnick, where can the fine people find you?
Look for us at heartlanddailynews.com.
And is it at ST Karnick on Twitter?
Yes.
Excellent. You can contact me at J Lakely or at Heartland Inst on Twitter. You should also visit heartland.org. Nate Myers, you are a ghost, as Donnie says, on social media.
I am. So you should definitely check out Heartland's Instagram page. It's the Heartland Institute on Instagram. Be sure to give us a follow.
Oh, thank you for that. And Justin T. Haskins, where can people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Socialist Twitter and Parler and whatever the heck Trump's new social media thing is on. I'm on there too now. And also on Gab too. I've got like 5 followers there. So if you like Gab, then go over there and follow me there. And go to stoppingsocialism.com and check out all the great stuff that we're doing. And Stopping Socialism TV on YouTube. Is that
Thank you.
enough? I can do more if you
no,
want.
no,
but I think that's
we've
enough.
already run long. That'll do. And please give this podcast a 5-star review on anywhere you can find your podcast. Share this video with your friends, and we'll see you here on YouTube next week. Bye bye.